Welcome back to the Purposeful Man. Today's episode is very special because for the first time we have with us the man who had the greatest influence on my life, my father, Benito Quintanilla. My father arrived in the United States with little more than his faith, his determination, and a vision for his family's future. He didn't speak English. He worked in construction. He worked laying roofs. He became a truck mechanic. He learned the trade of welding. And through decades of hard work, sacrifice, and faith, he built a life that allowed him to retire debt-free, own a home in the United States and another in Mexico, and most importantly, raise a family grounded in faith and solid values. Today, we have the privilege of hearing his story. We're going to start off with the first session, growing up in Mexico, his childhood. Dad, welcome to the Purposeful Man. I am very happy to have you here with me for this interview we are going to do, especially with Father's Day coming up this weekend. It is a blessing to be able to do this in the presence of our audience. And with Mexico playing their second match in the 2026 World Cup against South Korea, I'm wearing the Mexican jersey, the Mexican national team jersey. So let's go, Mexico. Let's see if we win. Well, the first question, Dad, tell us, where did you grow up and what was life like when you were a child? Well, when I grew up, I was born on the ranch of my grandfather, Benito Quintanilla. This is where I and my parents were born. Well, my older brother died when he was 7 years old, so I became the oldest. And when I was about 4 years old, I imagine, my dad brought us to the ranch of my grandfather, Manuel Flores, because he had bought land there and established his own ranch. I was barely 5 years old, I imagine, at that age. My dad started building his ranch. He struggled a lot because he was a very hardworking man, my dad. I remember him with all my heart, and my mom too, how they fought for us to get ahead. My parents were very hardworking, and I am grateful for the upbringing they gave us. Though they were poor and limited in many things, they got us ahead. So my dad started building his ranch, which he worked so hard on. I remember he would take me with him. I was very small, and since he was clearing the land to make the ranch, they would place me in the fork of a mesquite tree so the cows wouldn't step on me, because he had his own few cows there. When he started establishing the ranch, I remember I was very small, but thank God, how great God has been. Today, remembering the past, which is beautiful to recall, where we came from, I've been able to see how God has kept us and blessed us despite everything. I remember when he opened his farmland, it was new land. My dad, he didn't have a planting machine, so my mom would go to plant for him. I said to my mom, "No, Mom, I'll do it." I was barely 5 years old. And I remember that since it was new land, the plow my dad was using would get stuck, and I would go and fall right under the feet of the oxen. I remember he would punish me because I would spill the seeds, and he would tell me, "You must not waste the seed." Now, when I look back, I say, "Lord, thank you for how you helped us, how you helped my dad." That helped me as I grew up not to waste things, to be careful. I started getting a bit stronger because he would make me pick up everything I had dropped. Because there was a shortage of seeds to plant, he would make me gather them, and he would tell me, "Hurry up, you have to gather them." And yes, he punished me. But I thank my dad for being strict with me and how God has helped me through the years. I say, "Lord, thank you that my dad taught me to work. He taught me to take care of things. And to be honest, yes, to be honest, wherever I was. I thank God very much. So I kept growing. When he started building his house on the ranch, I remember my mom would send me on horseback to take him lunch. I remember I was very small, and the horse was extremely fat because my dad liked to keep his animals well cared for. I would reach a creek, and there I would fall. Not that the horse had thrown me off, because it was a very gentle horse, but going down the slope, since I was so small, I would slide off and fall. But I remember the animal would look around and look at me as if saying, "I didn't throw you off. You fell off on your own." Well, I remember he would start eating mesquite or whatever was there because the horse wouldn't leave. He would wait for me. As best as I could, I would get up with my little supply bag. Well, what I do remember is I never turned back. I never turned back. I had to fulfill my duty and bring my father his food. So I would arrive leading my horse by the halter, and my dad would say, "My son, did the horse throw you off?" I'd say, "No, he didn't throw me off." "Then why are you on foot?" "Because I fell. I fell because I couldn't mount him. I was too small." On the way back, he would lift me onto the horse, and I could cross the creek just fine because going up was different as I returned. But I kept learning until I could mount the horse by myself, and I did it. How God blesses us. Once my dad finished the house on the ranch, they had plenty of chickens. So many animals my mom had. May she rest in peace. It has been 1 year and 5 months since she departed. She was very careful with her animals. But I remember my dad at noon, "Go on, son, go around the ranch. Take the dogs to scare away the animals, the wild animals." Since he had just cleared that ranch, there were coyotes and other animals that would come to eat his chickens. And every single day, I had to do that. Aside from that, he kept a few goats, and he would send me to herd them too. I had a job to do, and I had to do it well. Because if you leave goats alone, they wander off wherever they want. These are beautiful memories of my childhood, of how my dad taught me to work. And then he sent me to school because of my grandfather, Fernando, may he rest in peace. The reading and the writing I know today, I know because of him. He always cared about me. He wanted me to study and be someone. He would come and pick me up, and I would spend time with them. I would go 4 or 5 months without seeing my parents. It is difficult when you are with somewhere else. Even if they love you very much, you're still limited. My grandfather loved me dearly, and my grandmother and uncles did too. I grew up with them most of the time, and they taught me a lot too. Although sometimes my uncle, may he rest in peace, my uncle Chencho, would discipline me because I would get into mischief. I recognize the late Uncle Pedro. He always did so much for me. He looked out for me, and he defended me. But with my Uncle Chencho Crescencio, I would get into mischief because I was the stable boy of the ranch. Even though I was only 6 or 7 years old, I was in charge of feeding the animals and going to school. As I grew up, I felt like the owner of the horses. And one day, they sent us to hand out invitations to the other ranches because there was a festival at the school. Well, I took the liberty of taking my uncle's horse. It was a Saturday. My dad had gifted my uncle a house and a piece of farmland he had cleared, and the horse was on that land. My uncle wouldn't call me by my name. He called me Canales. He'd say, "Canales, you have to go at noon to give water to the horse." So I go to water the horse. But earlier, the teacher had told me and Julano, my late cousin, Jose Quintanilla, "I want you to go deliver these invitations." Well, the easiest thing was I water the horse, I mount him, and off we went to distribute them. But I remember in Santa Isabel, because we had to go to school to pick up the flyers for the invitations, the plaza was perfect for racing horses. And he said to me, "What do you think? Should we run a little race?" I said, yes, sure, why not? My uncle's horse was very good at running. I let him loose, and I won. Then we went to finish our errands and returned. And I got back late to my grandfather's ranch. I took the horse back to the field, did everything right, watered him, let him loose, but I arrived late. My uncle and family were already worried about me. What happened? Where were you? I humbled myself. Uncle, the teacher sent us. He said, and who was it that was running horse races over in Santa Isabela? I replied, well, me. But let me tell you one thing. I won the race. He said, yes, but we were worried. I said, forgive me, Uncle. He gave me a good whipping. I could have done it, but the issue was that I should have asked first. But since I knew they were probably refused to let me take the horse, I took the liberty. However, it was always much better to ask for permission. My uncle gave me some good lashes with a cane. I wanted to cry, but there was nothing else to do. And how old were you, Dad? I was about 7 years old. Tiny. But what I mean to say is, if they send you to do something, you were obedient, of course. But I disobeyed by not asking for permission. I learned little by little. I spent those years with my grandparents, and how I thank them truly. How my grandfather looked out for me every year. He would come for me at the ranch and tell my parents, I've come to take my boy to school. How beautiful. I appreciate that so much. What I know of school, I owe to my grandfather. And my grandmother, Flores, was tougher. My grandfather, Fernando, was very sweet. I only remember him scolding me once. He had many goats, pigs, and animals, and it was very cold. Back then, I didn't know what shoes or jackets were. What you had on, that was it, and that was all. It wasn't like now where there are plenty of shoes, socks, and beanies on the ranch. There was none of that. Today, if you didn't wear them, it's because you don't want to. But back then, we didn't have that. And I remember it was very cold, and I had injured this toe. I had stubbed it, and it had grown like a tumor. I don't know. It was bad. Since I was in my grandparents and not my parents, life was different. I fell and smashed my toe, and it was dripping blood. My grandfather scolded me because the goats got past me while my uncle was cutting wood. I remember my uncle said to him, Dad, don't you see how this child is? Look at him. You are scolding him. I didn't say anything. I cried. Perhaps because at my tender age and the pain, but my uncle did stick up for me to my grandfather. And how old were you, Dad? I was about 6 or 7 years old at most. So it passed. It was fine. They scolded me. I was hurt. But I never gave up. I never said, I won't do it. We always kept going. It was a different lifestyle, Dad. Yes, and there were no complaints. Life in the ranch was very harsh, right, Dad? And he's like, yes. From very early, you had to know how to do something. You had to do something. I always carried water for my grandmother. When my uncles started getting married, like my Uncle Pedro first, I was grateful to my Aunt Olga, too. Whenever she saw me, she would give me a tortilla or something, because it was very different when you are with your parents compared to being with other people. Even if they are your grandparents, it's not the same. I love my aunts because they looked out for me. They would see that I had nothing, so they supported me. My Uncle Chencho and my Aunt Soko. I loved my Aunt Soko so much because, truly, son, she always looked out for me. It was my uncle who spoke harshly to me, and she would say, hey, please. And I apologized to her the other day because her mother would bring them sweets and things, and I knew where my aunt kept them. When they sent me to watch the goats, I would go and sneak 2 or 3 little candies, like gummies, and then she would go and give me more. Well, then I had more because I wanted to eat something. And she is still alive today. Yes, she is still alive today, and I go and hug her and say, Aunt, thank you. Thank you because you helped me so many times. You were my support, and I love my aunt, son. How old were you when you lived with Aunt Soko? I was about 7 or 8 years old. I was still just a child. I remember they always looked out for me, and how I thank God. And how old is Aunt Soko now? Oh, she's up in her 80s, 85 or 86. She was young in those years, in her 20s, right? Yes, yes. 20 or 24 years old, very young. And since she was at my grandfather's house, they would help me with my homework. There were math problems I didn't understand. And back then, it wasn't like now where they'll let you use a computer. There was none of that in the ranch. That did not exist. The teacher would give us square root problems, division, nouns, and all that. I didn't know those things, but thanks to them having more schooling, my late Uncle Chencho and my aunt, they would give me a little help. And sometimes for school festivals and dances, they would always give me the hardest parts, learning the scripts for the plays we had to perform. They always gave me the longest narratives, and they would help me. My aunt helped me, and I still have things she wrote down for me. I have kept them. So how could I not love my people, son? Of course I do, very much. So thank God I kept growing. I grew up in pure struggle. Nothing has been easy. And back on your ranch, when you were with your parents, you told me you had to do a lot of things because my grandma, your mother, had been sick for a long time. A long time. My dear mother, yes. We struggled with her. Seeing that sometimes they would send us to other ranches, almost all these people have passed away now, to have them make tortillas for us because we were so young and couldn't do it. And my dad didn't know how to do that. And there were 3 children living at the home, Dad? Yes, children. Aunt Margarita, your Uncle Jose. I was the oldest. So they would send me, and I would see the people looking at us, not with contempt, but as to say, with pity. Yes, look at these children. Look at these kids. And how old were you, Dad, when you were at that age, when you were leaving school? Oh, I was 5 or 6, 7 years old. And you were having to take care of your siblings? Yes. And they would send me with clothes for them to wash. I knew we were a burden to people. One day I went to another ranch because I saw they either couldn't or didn't want to help. The first day, yes, but then my dad said, go again, son, take them. And I saw there was no one there. I came back with my little tub. My dad asked me, and now what are we going to do, son? My grandfather worked in the fields. He was not a kitchen person. And my grandmother was sick in bed. My dad asked, what are we going to do, son? Well, I had to figure it out. And you had to figure it out, right, Dad? And so, yes, we had to figure it out, grind, regrind, and make them. One of the things I wanted to do was make things the way my mom did, because often you want to do things the way you see your parents do them, right? In mechanics, you learn what you want to do just like your dad did it. Now, there are better tools. Now, we have more technology. But back then, there was no technology. I saw it looked very easy when my mom did things on the stone grinding block. My sister Margarita helped me a lot. She was also very small. But I remember I cut my finger. Look how it turned out. That stone flipped over on me, smashed my finger, and there I was. My sister and I couldn't do it, and we were completely helpless. Dad, you were very tiny. The stone was big. Yes, for grinding the matete. It's called the matete. Well, we did what we could. My mother had wooden tortilla press, but the tortillas didn't come out the way we wanted. We would throw them and start shaping them by hand. They came out tiny and full of holes because we didn't know how. We were very young. We were kids, not even 10 years old. No, for that. So my dad would say, oh, how delicious. As long as they are well cooked, there's no problem. So we kept at it and we kept going until we grew stronger. My godfather, Juan, saw us struggling with that. And he said, at my house, we have 2 iron tortilla presses. He went and brought us one. We would wake up at 4:30 in the morning, and we were already grinding. We loved it. Yes, the tool made it easier. We were so happy. But years went by, and I have been able to see the hand of God. How God has been good to us. I'm very grateful to my parents. May they rest in peace. Dad, Mom, and I miss them. I still love them with all my heart. Of course, Dad. Because they were the ones who gave me life. They taught me to walk, and despite their poverty, they got us ahead as best they could. Yes, as best as they could. They got us ahead. And I remember when I was about 12 years old, I stopped going to school. What grade were you back then, Dad? What grade were you in when you didn't go back to school? I stopped at 5th grade, which I didn't finish. I only finished 4th grade. But I remember my grandfather, Fernando, sent word to my dad that he wanted me to help him watch his livestock. He had about 400 goats. He said, I want you to lend me my grandson, so he can help us. And the ranches were far apart. On horseback, it could easily be 3 or 4 hours from one ranch to another. My dad sent me with him. I remember it was for 3 months. I would go to a certain area, and I had to eat out there. My grandmother would pack me a little lunch, and I had to watch the animals. But the instructions he gave me was, just be careful when you see a storm coming, because there was a creek. If you stay on the other side, you will have to sleep out there with the animals. So if you see a storm coming, get out of there, cross it. Otherwise, you'll get stuck. And so I had to keep that in mind. The days were beautiful, just like it is here right now. Look how clear it is. You head out feeling very confident. But the day did arrive, and it started around 3 in the afternoon. And I didn't know the time either, because at the time there was no watch, no radio, no TV, nothing. We went by the shadow of the sun, and I saw it getting dark. The sky covered with black clouds, and it grew dark. You've seen how dark it gets at those hours sometimes. Yes, Dad. I remember gathering my animals. Come on, let's go. I found a very high hill, gathered them, and when the storm unleashed, what I wanted was to cross the creek, because that was the problem. That was what my grandfather had told me. If you don't cross in time, you'll have to sleep out there. And out there was no ranches. There was nothing. It was pure wilderness, just pasture land. The thunder and lightning started, and the animals got scared. But I yelled at them, let's go. And when you know what I discovered, sometimes animals are more obedient than we are humans. I herded them up a hill because in the darkness I could barely see. But I kept going. I knew they wouldn't lose their way. They guided me. When I got to the top of that hill, a flash of lightning lit up the hill where my grandparents' ranch was. I was right on the foot of that hill because the storm made it as dark as night. Yes, the storm made it look like if it was night, and I couldn't stop. At my age, I thought it had already become night. How old were you then, Dad? I was about 12 years old, yes, and well, I didn't have shoes. I wore my sandals, which we call in Spanish huaraches, which would flip upside down. I was getting pricked by thorns and everything. I started moving my herd towards my grandfather's ranch. The storm, the rain, and thunder kept going. I was scared, of course. Who wouldn't be at that age? The rain started to let up by time I reached his ranch. There were streams of water flowing everywhere, but I brought all the goats and sheep back safely. I arrived, and he said to me, "Oh, my child," I was deeply worried because he had no one to send me. Of course not. Of course, Dad. There was no cell phones. There was no GPS where they could locate you. No, there was nothing. Nothing. I didn't even know that none of that existed. Nor did I ever think he would be able to use it someday. Just like, look at that. The technology we have today. We would see old jalopies or tartanas wagons or animal-drawn carriages. But back then, there wasn't much of this. So my grandmother said, "Oh, my child, we were desperate and deeply worried about you." And I said, "No, Grandma, here I am." And there's all the livestock. Just look at that. At 12 years of age, Dad, and you didn't lose a single one, neither sheep nor goats? My uncles weren't there, and they were out at their stations, but it was fine. I did my job well. So, son, I have nothing to complain about. Nothing at all. And now even less, so thanks to God. Well, thank God. And God still asks me, "What more do you want, son? What more do you want?" No, God has blessed us, my son, because I grew up through hard work and heavy responsibilities. I also remember going back in time when my mom gave birth to my sister Dori, who was just a baby. My dad had to take my mom to the town of General Terán, and they would be gone for 2 or 3 days. It was very cold. Dad, and you had to stay behind in the ranch? Yes. Margarita and I, the two of us. And I remember once my dad told me, because he used to look for someone to stay and watch us. And for the days that person watched us, my dad had to pay them back by working days for them on their land. Days of hard labor, just for someone to watch us. Dad, and you, and even if it was only to watch you, yes. And one day I told him, "No, Dad, not anymore." He said, "What?" I said, "No, we'll stay by ourselves." We stayed completely alone in the ranch. Dad, in the ranch for 3 days? Well, yes, while he traveled to General Terán on the wagon to take my grandmother to the doctor to have her examined and come back, Dad. Yes. The only thing that I asked him was, just take Jose, my smaller brother, with you, because he was the youngest, younger than Margarita and me. So I said, just take him. And I remember Dori, the baby, was tiny. She was only a few months old. That is what moves me, son. I was the boss. And I told him, "You know what, Dad?" He asked, "What, my son?" I said, "Just leave me the pistol, because I have to tell you one thing. I didn't sleep at all during those nights, because I was thinking that I was the boss. And I had the gun there, and I knew that if anyone came to bother us, I didn't know what would happen." And how old were you, Dad? Well, I was under 12 years old. And my aunt Margarita, she must have been, 7? Yes. And you, too, were taking care of a younger baby girl. How young? Well, she was 3 or 4 months old. Months, not years. Months. Well, I had a cow that was specially kept for her. That was my job, even in the drizzling rain and when it was freezing cold and the little girl got sick. That's why sometimes I say it's good to watch how older people do things. I remember that when I was in school, my grandmother was brought a little baby girl to raise, my cousin Olga Sanchez, the daughter of my Uncle Enrique Lopez. She was a tiny little baby. I didn't know then what it meant that her soft spot had fallen. Se le cayó la mollera. It's a traditional folk illness belief where the crown of the head, when babies are born, it's not completely sealed, the skull. But I watched how my grandmother cured her back then. When my sister Margarita said to me, "I think the baby's soft spot has fallen," I told her, "Look, what do? We're all alone here." I will cure her. Give her to me. While using water just like I seen my grandmother do, I got up and did it. Even though the soft spot on her head made me very nervous, I did it, which was quite a daring thing. And she tells me the weather was bad and there was no dryer, no washing machine. My sister was very hard worker, and she still is. She would wash the baby's clothes, and there was no disposable diapers back then. Well, she was washing them, and then she said to me, "Brother, we don't have anything left to put on the baby. What do I do?" I said, "Let me think. I am the strong man here. Let me think." I threw a lot of firewood onto the fire, grabbed my mom's heavy iron, set something up on the table, and started ironing and drying diapers. No one had ever told me to do that. I just figured it out. I brought them to my sister. We gathered a good pile of them and asked her, "Sister, what happened?" She said, "The baby is better. Thank God." We were all alone. We couldn't depend on anyone. We could only depend on God to guide us. My sister told me, "Brother, the baby is doing fine now. She's recovered." So then it was back to Benito taking care of the animals, the cows, the oxen, and milking the little girl's special cow in the morning and afternoon so she had fresh milk. My sister would make her little atole, which is a warm corn-based drink, with it, I remember. Yes, just to clarify for the audience, it's important for them to know that these irons were not electric. They were charcoal irons. You had to put coals inside the iron to be able to iron on the wrench because there was no electricity, none at all. So that is how you grew up, Dad. A very difficult upbringing, but one where you also showed a lot of resilience. You were very observant of the older folks, watching how they did things. For a young age, there was a need to grow up fast, to be strong and resilient. That's incredible. When we see the difference between what life is like then and what life continues to be in some parts of the world. Of course, now we live with a lot of technology in some of our societies. Many things are easy, but in many cases, people are struggling mentally today. Whereas back then, people got by on their strength, their character, and their virtues. Not that bad people don't exist, didn't exist back then, Dad. Because they've always existed since the creation of the world. But look at how you, even with all your limitations, were able to get ahead. Yes, I am so very grateful to the Lord.